Recording in progress.
All right, we're going to get to it. 9 a.m. I would like to call this special call meeting of the Milton City Council for Monday, August 5th, 2024 to order. The city strongly recommends that you review tonight's agenda carefully, and if you wish to speak on any item on the agenda, then please bring your comment cards to the clerk as soon as possible. While the Milton rules allow a speaker to turn in their comment card up until the clerk calls the agenda item, once the agenda item is called, no more comment cards can be accepted. Will the city clerk please call the roll and make general announcements?
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Before I call roll for the August 5th, 2024 special called City Council meeting, I would like to remind those in attendance to please silence all cell phones at this time. Those attending the meeting who would like to make a public comment are required to complete a public comment card and submit to the city clerk prior to the agenda item being called. All speakers will identify themselves with name, address, and/or organization before beginning their comment. If you would like to make a public comment, please bring your comment card to me now. Demonstration of any sort within the chamber is prohibited. Please refrain from any applause, cheering, booing, outburst, or dialogue with any person speaking. Anyone in violation will be asked to leave. Mayor and Council, as I call roll this morning, please confirm your attendance. Mayor Peyton Jamison.
Here.
Councilmember Andrea Veerhoff.
Here.
Councilmember Doug Haney.
Here.
Councilmember Juliet Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Jan Jacobus.
Present.
And Councilmember Phil Kramer.
Here.
For the record, Councilmember Carol Cookley is absent. Mayor, you have a quorum. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, need to have a motion to approve the meeting agenda?
Make a motion to approve the meeting agenda as read.
Second.
Written.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Jacobus and a second from Councilmember Johnson to approve the meeting agenda. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Next is general public comment. Do we have any public comment?
We do not, Mayor.
Okay, I'll waive public comment and I will ask you to call the next item.
Mayor, that next item is going to be under first presentation. It's consideration of an ordinance of the mayor and city council of Milton, Georgia to establish the ad valorem tax rate of the city of Milton for fiscal year 2025 and for other purposes. This is the first public hearing for this item, and the second public hearing tonight will be at the council meeting tonight. It's agenda item number 24224. Mayor Jamison?
Thank you. Guess I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Bernadette Harville.
Well, bear with me. Let's go ahead and
We
get a vote on that. That was first presentation, and then we'll go into public hearing.
Oh, sorry. Hold on one second here. I don't have a first presentation on my phone.
On page.
Want me to make a motion?
I don't
Page
ha- I don't
7.
have it. Let me just, I don't have it on here.
So first
First-
presentation on page 8, top of page 8.
Oh, hold on. Where's 6 and 7 here? Okay. Can I get a motion on first presentation? Here we go. I got it.
I'll make a motion to
Sorry.
approve first presentation, agenda item 24-224.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilmember Kramer, and a second from Councilmember Verhoff to approve the first presentation item, agenda number 24-224. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
That is unanimous. So we do not have a consent agenda, no reports and presentations, and I will ask the city clerk to please call the next item.
Mayor, that next item is going to be public hearing, and that's a consideration of an ordinance of the mayor and council of the city of Milton, Georgia, to establish the ad valorem tax rate of the city of Milton for fiscal year 2025 and for other purposes. Agenda item number 24224, our deputy city manager, Ms. Bernadette Harville.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. We are here today to discuss setting the 2024 millage rate, which will fund fiscal year 2025 activity. This is the first of 3 required public hearings, and we'll go into the details of those requirements a little later in the presentation. First, we have the agenda for this public hearing. We will go over some important definitions, followed by the state's requirements for public hearings and advertisements regarding setting a millage rate. Next, we will discuss the millage rate options. Please keep in mind, you can approve any millage rate up to the legal cap of 4.731 mils. Staff has advertised the current millage rate of 4.389 mils to allow council the flexibilities to select any rate up to and including the current millage rate without the need to re-advertise or hold any additional meetings. If council wishes to adopt a rate from 4.390 to 4.731, that will require additional advertisements and hearings. We will discuss how this relates to the fiscal year 2025 budget, which has been prepared later in this presentation. Following the millage rate overview, we will break down the digest by category and show the taxes that will be levied at the current millage rate and the rollback millage rate, which will be followed by a review of the financial metrics of Milton and the neighboring North Fulton cities, as well as an overview of the draft general fund budget summary for fiscal year 2025, and a look at the capital improvement plan's forecasted pay-go transfers. After that, we will look at some ways property tax owners can reduce their tax liability. We'll look at how to calculate a tax bill, and then the value of the citizens' tax dollars as a Milton taxpayer. So here we have a few important definitions. First is a mill. A mill is $1 per $1,000 of assessed property value, or 0.001 times the assessed value. Your fair market value is an estimate of the market value of your property as determined by the Fulton County Board of Assessors. So this is not to be confused with anything you might see on Zillow or from a real estate agent. Your assessed or taxable value is 40% of that fair market value. Property taxes are calculated by multiplying the millage rate by the assessed or taxable value, which has been adjusted after any exemptions. So you have a little formula right there to show you how that works. Two key terms we're going to talk about throughout this presentation are rollback rate and millage equivalent. The rollback rate is the previous year's millage rate minus that millage equivalent of the total net assessed value added by reassessment. So that's trying to look at the value added by increased property values on existing property and taking that out. The millage equivalent is the equation where the reassessment of existing real property is divided by the current year's net digest and then multiplied by the prior year's millage rate. So we use these two calculations to determine if there's been any increase in taxes at a revenue standpoint. It's not by an individual taxpayer standpoint. Anytime the city's advertised millage rate exceeds the computed rollback rate, we must hold 3 public hearings to allow for citizen input. Since Milton advertised at the current millage rate to allow council that flexibility to adopt any millage rate up to and including the current millage rate, we will hold the 3 public hearings as follows. This morning is our first public hearing. This evening, we will have our second one at 6 p.m. And then next Monday, immediately following our work session, which will include an extensive overview of our budget proposal, we will have the final public hearing as well as the adoption of the millage rate. In addition to the public hearings, the city is required to place 2 ads and prepare a formal press release. At least 1 week before each public hearing, a notice of property tax increase must be published, and at least 1 week before the meeting where the millage rate will be adopted, the current tax digest and 5-year history of levy must be published. Both ads must be made available on the city's website, and our communications director, Greg Botello, has helped me ensure that these requirements have been met for this year. Both ads were based on the digest figures provided by Fulton County. And on this slide, you can see a snippet of the PT 32.1, which is the worksheet provided by the Department of Revenue that we must use to calculate that rollback rate. You can see here that we have last year's digest, and then we have the reassessment of existing real property, and then the other changes to taxable digest, which are typically new additions that have come on board, and then the total for 2024. I would like to point out that Milton is required to estimate homestead exemptions for the coming year using values provided by Fulton County. And the county does not have a true-up process for data to reflect changes that result from the final digest being issued or any other appeals that are finalized throughout the year. So there's always a slight difference between the exemptions reported and on other presentations that you'll see, and then compared to what you see here on the PT 32.1, but they're not statistically significant. So here's the math behind the ads. As mentioned earlier, we have laid out the math that used to calculate the figures you see in the advertisements. This is just for transparency purposes. We do not have to go over them in detail, but I like to have them in the presentation so anyone who would like to see how we get to those rates can do so. So we show you exactly how to calculate a millage equivalent, how to calculate a rollback rate, and how that impacts and presents as the percentage of tax increase, which is the terminology that the state uses. And that you can look at our ad and see how we have presented those numbers. And then in the 5-year history and current digest, we show you exactly how you get that current year net digest to get the taxes levied, and then showing how that percentage increase is shown year over year. On the current year history, you'll see that it's at 100% collection rate what the comparison will be. So that might not be in year 1 of your collections, but that would be overall when you collect everything reported on the PT 32.1. Any questions before I go on? Okay. In the next few slides, we're going to go over some of the millage rate scenarios, including the current millage rate of 4.389 mils and the calculated rollback rate of 4.171 mils, which would offset any increases that result from the reassessments of existing real property. Please keep in mind that the council can improve any millage rate up to that capped rate again, but we'd have to hold additional hearings. On this slide, you'll also see the adopted millage rates back to the incorporation of the city. And at the bottom of the slide, you will see the separately calculated green space bond millage rate. This is the variable rate used to allow for the property tax collections for debt service payments on the green space bond, including principal and interest due in FY 2025. This rate is addition to the maintenance and operating rate and is not included in that legal cap of 4.731 mils. For reference, the bond millage rate last year was 0.364 mils, and the year before was 0.452 mils. As you may recall, the basic and floating exemptions do not apply to the bond millage rate, but all other city-provided exemptions now apply to both millage rates after the exemption modifications were approved by council, the state, and the voters about 2 years ago. Based on the current digest figures, we have forecasted a bond millage rate of 0.356 mils to cover the debt service that will be due in fiscal year 2025. As the digest values fluctuate, the millage rate required to pay off the annual debt will fluctuate as well. Before we go on to the conversation about the budget, I wanted to go over the details related to our annual update to the financial metrics comparison. This comparison was one of the objectives included in the current strategic plan and helps us understand how our government is doing compared to surrounding jurisdictions. When looking at the per capita data, it is important to recall that Milton has an intentionally reduced density and smaller commercial footprint than all the other cities we compare to. You can see on the table here with a lower millage rate than other cities, Milton is able to collect significantly more revenues due to the makeup, other cities are able to collect significantly more revenues due to the makeup of their communities. When looking at the expenditures, sorry, you can see there, right there, sorry, with the millage rate. So you can see that even though Milton's millage rate is one of the lowest, we also still collect one of the lowest revenues when looking at property taxes. When looking at the expenditures, you can see that Milton, even with its lower density, has the second lowest per capita spending, something we're very proud of on our team. And when looking at the actual operating spending, we are the lowest by a fair margin. This next graph shows you how each government is spending operating funds by function. You can see that all of the cities are trending similarly, with public safety and general government being the top two areas of spending. The final area we look at in our comparison is debt. All figures here are through fiscal year 2023's audited financials, and I believe one of our neighboring cities has a new issuance after that timeline, so figures will change next year. And there you can see the per capita level where Milton stands as the third lowest, but when looking at an actual average debt, we are the lowest in the area. On this slide on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the original fiscal year 2025 revenue forecasts that were projected this time last year. Our team reviewed current circumstances, including trends related to other revenue sources, and have updated the forecast to align with the current millage rate of 4.389 mils. On the right side of the screen, you can see that taxes will be levied under the current millage rate and the rollback millage rate for real property, personal property, and motor vehicle. For year one, we use 97%, 65%, and 70% based on historic collection trends. So this is the percentage of the PT 32.1 figures that the Fulton County puts together, and that's the percentage of the rate of which we collect in year one. The current millage rate would yield an anticipated revenues of 5.23% or $808,340 higher than the rollback millage rate of 4.171 mils. Here we have our general fund budget summary. This summary compares the current year projections for FY25 to the amended budget for FY24. These amendments include some updates pending council approval, which will be presented in September for your consideration. Staff has made some alterations since the feedback sessions, but nothing material has changed, and all updates will be reviewed in detail at the budget workshop next Monday before council adopts the millage rate. Fiscal year 2025's property tax projections, again, were based on that current millage rate, and we will go over the details of those revenues in just a moment. You can also see here that the proposed expenditure summary by department, staff will be going over those details on August 12th, but wanted to include this summary to help explain where we stand today. And the city is always looking to expand and diversify its revenue opportunities as is required by law, as well as presented in the current strategic plan. The city is highly dependent upon property tax revenue, and you can see that the current year real property tax is the city's highest revenue source at approximately 34% of the total recurring revenues. It is down 1% from last year's projection at this time. And most cities have a commercial tax base closer to 40 or 50% of their digest, while Milton's remains around 11 to 13%. So it's also something else to keep in mind when we kind of look at these property tax revenues. When speaking to the mayor last week, he asked where we had any room in the budget for some discretion to consider when reviewing the millage rate options. As mentioned earlier, historically, the most discretion has been found in the capital pay-go area of the budget. Some areas of the capital budget are less discretionary than others as we aim to maintain equipment and infrastructure at certain levels, thereby avoiding more costly repairs in the long run. As you may recall, we paused a few parks and recreation projects this year in order to take advantage of an unforeseen opportunity to obtain land and build a new active athletic park on Deerfield Parkway. The slide you see here has funding beginning to go back to the Indoor Community Center, a project that was paused, as well as the new turf fields at Bell Memorial Park. When considering the millage rate to fund fiscal year 2025, there are pros and cons to consider on both sides. With the current millage rate, we can begin to fund these projects, but there may be areas that can be reviewed at mid-year once we see the audited fund balance for fiscal year 2024, as well as how the new impact fees are coming in, which these two projects would be eligible for as well. Again, we're not making any decisions this morning or tonight, but we did want to share this feedback with you for your consideration over the next week in order to adopt after the budget workshop. As Milton's Digest is primarily residential, the city recognizes several exemptions in order to reduce the tax liability for qualifying property owners. There is the basic homestead exemption, and there are two exemptions available to our senior population, including a full value exemption and a full value exemption for those with permanent disabilities. As a reminder, all three referendum questions that we had last year were approved, so now you can see that our senior exemptions go towards both the maintenance and operating and the bond millage rate. In addition, we have the floating CPI exemption, which is for your primary residence and up to 5 contiguous acres of land. This exemption alone outpaces all of Milton's other exemptions, including the full value exemptions we just went over. The floating exemption is the difference between the current assessed value and the adjusted base year value. The adjusted base year value for current property owners with the basic homestead exemption is the lower of the appraised values in 2016, 17, or 18, or for new purchasers, we're giving the lower of the current or immediately preceding year's appraised value. So that keeps that primary residence and 5 contiguous acres capped at a 3% or lower increase each year when looking at the taxable value. Exemptions are taken after that, so they could be even lower. Any questions about the CPI? We also have our conservation use value assessment. In addition to the exemptions, the state actually offers this program where your property would be looked at from a use perspective instead of a fair market value. So this is very important for some of our larger landowners who maintain their agricultural use on their property. So if you have additional questions, please reach out to us or the county. This can be a very significant value for property owners. And before we discuss how to calculate a tax bill, I just want to take a moment to point out a few things about the annual assessment notices that tend to cause a little bit of confusion. It is important to note that the assessment is not a bill, and although the county provides an estimate at the bottom of the assessment, property owners cannot use it to calculate anticipated taxes for 2 main reasons. First, the tax assessment notices go out before the digest is sent to the cities for them to begin to process the setting of the millage rate, so they use last year's millage rate. And number 2, the county does not maintain parcel level exemption data for Milton's exemptions. So as you can see at the bottom there'll be nothing for if you have your CPI floating homestead exemption, which is very significant, it does not show up on this bill. So we've kind of been working with some of our property tax owners to show them what their assessment was last year, then what their bill came out to be, to show how different those can be. So just important for them to notice the main thing they're looking for on this bill is to make sure that they agree with their fair market value, and if that is in line, and then also ensuring that they still have all their exemptions in place. They can always call our staff in the finance department to confirm that. Now I'd like to talk about how you can calculate your tax bill. I think it's helpful for everyone to understand that. On this slide, we have the average fair market value of $700,000. It has gone up a little bit this year, but I wanted to use this example specifically since we had 4.389 mils also in last year's calculation to show that even with the year change, that calculation doesn't change when using the same exact fair market value and same exact millage rate. So you'll take that fair market value times 40% to get your assessed value or your taxable value. You then, after that, reduce by your exemption. So if you have the floating homestead exemption, that would go into this line, and you get your subtotal, which is then multiplied by the millage rate, and then that's how you get your taxes due. And finally, we look at the value of your tax dollar. The department distribution on this table is based on the current fiscal year 2025 proposed budget, and it takes into consideration how much you are paying on an annual, monthly, or daily basis for these services with the proposed millage rate of 4.389 mils. So for $3.19 a day, a resident would be getting all those services, including paying off the debt service on our bond and the money going towards our PAYGO program and the capital projects. And here you can look at it compared from the 4.389 current millage rate to the 4.171 rollback millage rate to get an idea of what that looks like across the different categories. And that is our conversation for this morning. Again, we will have 2 more public hearings in the same manner, and we will also be going over on the 12th in greater detail our budget one more time before you select your millage rate.
And on the 12th, we're going to have the budget meeting and then a meeting following that to do the millage rate, correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Okay. Any questions for Ms. Bernadette
Night.
tonight? Okay. Any questions? All right. Any public comment on this?
There are none, sir.
Okay, I'll close the public hearing, and we will vote on this on the 12th, and we'll talk about it again tonight.
Thank you.
So there is no zoning agenda, no unfinished business, or no new business. Any council reports? Hearing none, I'll have a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion from Councilman Jacobus and a second from Councilman Verhoff to adjourn. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you.
Bernadette?
Thanks.